Mixed hypothetical syllogism. What exactly is a mixed hypothetical syllogism? Let's understand that. Although it's already written here, so let's get familiar with this. I'm saying here that it contains both categorical and conditional propositions. You see the difference between the two, if in case it's asked in the exam, is that you remember that the pure one is only dealing with what? It is only dealing with hypothetical or conditional premises. But here you find both categorical plus conditional propositions used in a mixed hypothetical syllogism. Okay, so such syllogisms contain both a categorical and a conditional or a hypothetical proposition. So if the categorical premise does what? We've done the definition of a categorical premise in the first one, okay, when we discuss categorical syllogisms. So I told you a categorical syllogism or a premise affirms the truth. It affirms the truth of the antecedent of the conditional premise, or you can also say it affirms the truth of the antecedent of the conditional proposition or the hypothetical premise or the hypothetical proposition. Okay, and what happens to the consequent? We've used the antecedent, so there must be something happening with the consequent. The consequent of that hypothetical premise or of that conditional premise or proposition is the what? It is the conclusion. It is the conclusion of the argument. Okay, if both these requirements are there, so we simply deduce what? That we simply deduce that the syllogism is valid in nature. We simply deduce that the syllogism is valid in nature. Now this is the definition of it. It is very important. Let's do it again. I'm saying here, these, the premises that are used in a mixed hypothetical syllogism, what do they affirm? They affirm the truth of the antecedent of the conditional premise, and the consequent of that conditional premise or hypothetical premise is the conclusion of the argument. And if this is something which is in place, then we simply affirm that the argument is valid. Right now, what we have just done here, let me just make some space. What we have just done here, like what I just told you, is what? It is modus ponens. It is modus ponens. Very, very important. Modus ponens is one of the rules of inference. There are 9 rules of inference. For instance, modus ponens, modus tollens. Then there are simplification. All of these we have we'll discuss them in the lectures, but for the time being, understand what exactly is a modus ponens. A modus ponens, for example, is what? If P is true, then Q is true. Now, very importantly, please pay attention. If P is true, then Q is true is what? This is a classic example of a conditional premise, or I can say this is a classic example of a hypothetical premise, right? This is the major premise. This is the first premise, okay? What is the second premise? The second premise is P is true. Okay, P is true. What is the conclusion? The conclusion here is therefore Q is true. Is this clear? So that's exactly what we are saying. If P is true, then Q is true. P is true, therefore Q is true, right? So this is the conclusion. This is the minor premise. This is also the categorical premise. Let me just point it out to you. We've said here that it contains both categorical and conditional premise. So are we qualifying that here? Are we qualifying that condition here? Yes, we are. With this statement, it is what? This statement is a hypothetical premise or a conditional premise. And this statement that P is true, that is the second one or the minor premise, this is what? This is a classic example of a categorical premise. So when you see that in a syllogism there is both hypothetical or conditional premises and categorical premises, you automatically understand that what are we dealing with? We're dealing with mixed hypothetical syllogism, right? So what does this become? This become P horseshoe Q, P therefore Q. Okay, P horseshoe Q. Why? Because if and then is used, so we're going to use P. P horseshoe Q, P therefore Q. So if the question is asked in the exam, what is the logical structure for modus ponens? It is exactly this, right? Now this is one bit of it. On the other hand, you have to understand that if the categorical proposition affirms the falsity, if it affirms the falsity, then what happens? Why are we taking this angle? Because here the categorical proposition was affirming the truth, right? We've written the word true here. But what happens if the categorical proposition is affirming the falsity? Falsity of what? Falsity of the consequent of the conditional premise, or of the hypothetical premise. Don't get confused. Let me show you both so that you understand. Here, this is the first premise. If P is true, then Q is true. Okay, this is a conditional premise. The second premise, that is a minor premise here, is a categorical proposition, which is what? Affirming that P is true, right? But here we're going to take the example that what happens if the falsity of the consequent of the conditional premise happens. Okay, so in that case, the falsity of the antecedent, the falsity of the antecedent of what? Of the hypothetical or of that conditional premise is the conclusion of the syllogism. Is this clear? What am I saying? Let me just draw the logical structure and you'll automatically understand. I'm saying that this is going to become, if P is true, then Q is true.